Welcome back to another week of Tea with a Shepherd, and we are in Matthew chapter 20. And we are definitely getting closer to the time of Jesus' death and resurrection. So, in some of the other Gospels, it says that Jesus was setting his eyes towards Jerusalem, or he was looking towards Jerusalem, and it's been this whole process of them getting closer and closer to Jerusalem and him knowing what was coming. So, we're at that kind of point in the story where they're getting closer and closer to Jerusalem at this point. And now, the last chapter we talked about, we ended with the rich young ruler. And so we're picking up here and keeping in mind that everything is connected. So it's not separate. So Jesus begins to tell a parable right after the rich young ruler leaves. Jesus has talked to his disciples, and we come into this now. And also, I am reading from a different translation now. I actually like the translation of the Complete Jewish Bible. This is the study Bible. But I decided just to read this one because it gives a little bit more insight and understanding to the parables. So here we go. Matthew chapter 20. The kingdom of heaven is like a farmer who went out at daybreak to hire workers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the workers on a wage of 1 denarius, or the standard daily wage, he sent them off to his vineyard. Then, on going out at about 9 in the morning, he saw more men standing in the market square doing nothing, and said to them, "You go to the vineyard too. I'll pay you a fair wage." Excuse me. So they went. At noon and again around 3 in the afternoon, he did the same thing. Now, it started off when it says daybreak, that was around 6 a.m. So this is every 3 hours. About an hour before sundown, about 5 o'clock, he went out, found still others standing around, and asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day doing nothing?" They said to him, "Because no one hired us." "You too," he told them, "go to the vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, starting with the last ones hired and ending with the first." The workers who came an hour before sunset each received a denarius. So the workers who came first expected they would get more, but each of them also received just a denarius. On receiving their wages, they began grumbling to the farmer. These latecomers, and notice they are grumbling to the farmer, not to the foreman who is told to go and give a pay. "These latecomers have worked only 1 hour, while we have borne the brunt of the day's work in the hot sun. Yet you have put them on an equal footing with us." But he answered one of them, "Look, friend, I am not being unfair with you. Didn't you agree to work today for a denarius? Now take your pay and go. I choose to give the last worker as much as I'm giving you. Haven't I the right to do what I want with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity? Thus the last ones will be first, and the first last." Okay, so let's talk about this in a little bit. So, since we're just coming from the rich young ruler, and you have this understanding that the entrance to the kingdom of heaven is not based on works, which is what the rich young ruler was kind of looking at things. Well, I've done all these things, so therefore I should be considered as perfect. I should be able to enter into the kingdom of heaven. Yet he didn't. And so here we have this story. Jesus is telling the story of this farmer that is not based on works, it's based on the grace of God. And this farmer who decided to show generosity, to show grace to all these workers. It was his choice. It was totally his choice if he wanted to do this. Is also the choice of the workers, because he called for the workers to come and work at his vineyard, and the workers could have decided, "I don't want to." They turn away the grace, even though that was an abundant amount of grace. And not only that, but you would also see later on in the story how much generosity that this farmer had. But it was still their choice if they actually went to work. But those that chose to receive the gift of grace that was extended to them did actually receive abundant, abundant grace. So this is what he's kind of putting these stories together. So you had the example, and now he's telling the story behind it. Okay, so it's not about what you do. It is, in fact, you can come in if he's saying it doesn't matter where you come in your life. If it's late at the last hour, at the last second, God's grace is still extended. So even down to for this story, there's only 1 hour left of the day. These people aren't going to work for very long. And yet he's saying it doesn't matter how long you've worked. My grace is still available to you, even if it's the last moment. We see this with when we get to the crucifixion, and there's two thieves on the cross, And one in his last final moments, as he's dying, he cries out and said, Lord, remember me when you enter into paradise. And Jesus extends that grace to this man. Even though his life was terrible, even though he had sinned all these things that were not good, he still extended that grace because he cried out to him and said, Lord, remember me. And because of that, Jesus said, you will be this day in paradise with me, or you will be with me in the kingdom of heaven. So it doesn't matter where it is in time that you accept and receive God's grace. And that's the point of the story. It's not about your works, it's not about what you did in your life. It comes down to God's gift of grace and mercy, and if we accept that or not. We also see that in the story of the prodigal son. The prodigal, we had two sons in that story, and one of the sons has been faithful and loyal all his life to his father, yet the prodigal son was not. And the same grace and mercy and inheritance to the father's um, everything that he had was still given to that son that chose to run away and squander everything. But it was because of the heart of the father, the grace given to him, that he was able to receive. So this is the story. This is what Jesus is saying. My grace, my love, my acceptance of you is not based on anything you've done. We don't deserve God's love and forgiveness, and we just don't. We don't deserve it. However, we are worthy of his love. And that means that he would die for just you. He loves us that much that he would sacrifice everything because he sees us as worthy. It's like with a child, with baby. I think I've talked about this in previous videos, is that the baby hasn't done anything to earn your love. They can't do anything. In fact, they demand everything. They cry, they scream, they're needing all these things. And it's exhausting. But it's not because of their doing or what they've been like all their short life that pulls on the heart of the mother or the father. It's the fact that they're part of their creation. That's part of who they are. That's a child that belongs to them, and they love them. And that is exactly God's heart. His love and grace is extended to us in those situations because of the fact that we're worthy. We're not deserving, but we're worthy of his love. Also in the beginning, so those that God, or this farmer, speaks to the workers that are there. He tells them that if you'll come and work for me for a denarius. So this is what he says. They agree to that fee, to that wage, excuse me. But later on, when he's hiring, he doesn't tell them the amount for which they're going to work. He just says, "We'll go work in the field," and they go. Um, so with these that are working from the earlier part of the day, and of course Jesus puts those that came in last, he gets them paid first, and he's switching the way that we think, because we have this other mindset of pride and of how we think we should. There's an expectation. In fact, I had written this down. Disappointment is misplaced expectation, and it turns into complaining and envy. So when we misplace our expectations, then it can easily turn into that where we're griping and complaining, we're finding everything wrong, even though we would have been perfectly happy with the denarius paid earlier in the day. But because of the other things that followed, then we start to change our expectation. So before, their expectation was at the end of the day, I'd get a denarius. But then later on, when they see these other ones coming in, just like the prodigal son's brother, he had a different expectation. Well, I've been here this whole time. I've been loyal to you, Father. Why does he get just as much as I do? Why is he getting the party? His expectation was misplaced. And so it led to complaining and envy. Okay, so then, let's see. When it was talking about the market square doing nothing, the Greek word there means no fruit, barren, idle, and lazy. So these people possibly were lazy. Maybe they weren't wanting to work. Whether or not it was a willingness that they, or it's not a willingness, but a non-willingness, unwillingness to do anything. They were just lazy and waiting day till later on the day to get up. Whatever the case is, the farmer still has compassion on them and says still to come work, even though he knows that they've been doing nothing. Of course, their reason is, well, nobody's hired them. Now, if that's the case, then why haven't they been there the early part of the day? Why hasn't he seen them throughout the town as he's doing his job, or doing his errands and whatever? He would have seen them, except that they weren't out there. So whatever the case is, they were idle, they were barren, they weren't producing any fruit. Yet Jesus still calls them. The farmer still calls them. So now this is also going to be different than when we enter into the kingdom of heaven. There is some passages that talk about us being rewarded when we get to heaven in different ways. So that's a totally different concept. That there is different jewels and different rewards for the work that we do on earth. But that's in John 4:36 and 1 Corinthians 3:8. But what Jesus is talking about here is about entrance into the kingdom of heaven, and that's why it's right after the story of the rich young ruler. So it has to do with context. Okay, now we get also to where he says, "Or do you begrudge my generosity, that the last ones will be first and the first last?" Okay, so that phrase about do you begrudge my generosity, that is actually literally, is your eye evil? That's the Greek word that's being used there. And it goes back to Matthew 6:22 that we talked about before, that a good eye means, having a good eye meant to be generous, but having a bad eye or evil eye, that's being stingy. So what he's saying is, do you begrudge me for having a good eye of being generous? And you're looking through the bad eye, the evil, stingy eye, and that is not my heart. You're blinded by self centered envy. And we're going to see it's interesting because as we get into the next part, you're going to see these people that are coming that are blind. So there is all these connections that Jesus is making. This is why you have to take everything together and not separate them to so many parts, because everything connects and there's reasons why they're together. Also, the other thing to mention before I wrap this up is when Jesus says, or the farmer says, but he answered one of them, "Look, friend, I'm not being unfair to you." It's actually something I want to go and dig into a little bit more further, because the word for friend is heteros, I think is how you pronounce it. But the meaning behind that Greek word is posing as a comrade, but in reality, you only have that person's own interest in mind. So it was a condescending way to say friend. In fact, this is the same word that's used when Judas goes to betray Jesus and Jesus calls him friend. And this is the friend that he's talking about, which is why I really want to go study the word friend throughout all the Bible, because I think it's enlightening to understand what he's saying throughout all that. So we'll leave it here and we'll pick up tomorrow. And I'm looking forward to diving in and connecting all these dots.